All right, great. All right, so this is a continuation of the healthcare webinar series in health tech. This week's is on healthcare security. So we will quickly go through some data breaches in other industries, how passwords are hacked, some two-factor authentication and KYC stuff, how to prevent data breaches, and of course, how we can help in the end. Great. So let's get right into it. First, a quick about us. Ionix Technologies is leading this webinar. Ionix is a technology company working in Web3, FinTech, and health tech. And me, myself, I am Manas Samant. I lead the healthcare vertical here at Ionix Technologies, as well as I consult for a lot of different companies and hospitals regarding healthcare policy, payments, and of course, health tech. So just to get into some data breaches in other industries to start off this way, just to kind of understand it's not just health and how these things work. So last summer at twitch.tv, there was a really interesting hack that occurred there. So it was really that generally when you see that accounts are hacked or a website is hacked, they steal the usernames and passwords, and they're able to get to some personal data. The reason that I brought up this one specifically is that this was a massive hack. It was very different than other hacks. So Twitch is an interactive live streaming platform for gaming and entertainment. It was purchased by Amazon back in 2014 for $970 million. And the reason why this was a little bit different was that they had their entire twitch.tv platform details stolen from their source code, which included the entire history of commit changes. So every change and revision to code, the various console and phone versions, and all data about their unreleased gaming platform. Even creator and streamer payment history was leaked. And this really exposed the key technologies and proprietary info that they use for their multi-billion-dollar industry-leading platform. And the hacker even leaked the internal red teaming tools, which are tools designed to improve security by having staff pretend to be hackers. So even those tools were leaked. And the other interesting thing was, even though the hacker dumped about 126 gigabytes of data, he or she did not actually share the usernames or passwords of their users. It was just more sharing all of the info of the platform, which is, of course, highly proprietary. So if you think about it, cybersecurity is often a point of contention with partner companies when someone's hiring a company, even partnering with someone like Ionix. You really want to think about what the security exchange is going to be. I've signed a lot of NDAs with companies and agreed not to share their proprietary info. I've done the required HIPAA compliance training multiple times. But after this Twitch hack got me thinking, if even Amazon can't keep their information safe from cyber attacks, what does the future look like for smaller companies and especially individuals? So I want to get into ransomware as the second point, which has happened at hospitals multiple times, where basically someone will get into your system and then kind of block it off so nobody can access it, and they ask you to pay a ransom. I think nowadays they ask for it in Bitcoin, but you have to pay a certain amount of Bitcoin in order for them to give you access back to your system. So this week alone, I didn't have to look too far. Common Spirit Health, the fourth largest US health system, which has 140 hospitals, was hit by a ransomware attack. And this led to delays in surgeries, patient care, appointments, and all kinds of things. So it really affects the end user. It affects patients. It affects a lot of people if you have your system hacked. So the last thing is password dumps. So really the way that you get into this is that if somebody has malware in your computer is one way, and they can kind of search your RAM for your username and passwords. Sometimes they'll be able to find them in plain text, otherwise they'll hashed. And we'll get into hashing and salting in a later slide. But basically, once they're into your system, they can find usernames and passwords. They can get to an admin account and find a lot of usernames and passwords. And once they have these, a lot of people will use their same password for a different site. So your bank account doesn't have to get hacked. They can get your password from a different site and try it at all kinds of different places. And that's how they can get into your bank account. Even if your bank is secure, if you use the same password at multiple places, they can get into everything. And there is a website. I don't have the URL here, but it's haveibeenpwned.com, PWNED. So if you go to that website and you enter your email address, it will search a bunch of different online leaked passwords and usernames, and it'll look for your email address and see how many hacks have your info, so you know which passwords to change. How passwords are hacked. So I did mention a little bit about malware, that these programs will kind of search your RAM, which is your short-term memory on your computer, where your passwords may be stored. And the first one I want to get into is UCSD Health. So this is the University of California, San Diego. So this was last summer. UC San Diego Health was hit for the PHI, or the Protected Health Info, 500,000 patients. So this was a really big hack for this health system. And this hack included full names, birth dates, addresses, medical diagnoses, lab results, social security numbers, prescription information, usernames, and passwords. Last I checked, there was an ongoing lawsuit for breaking the HIPAA breach rule. If you remember our previous webinar, or you can watch the VOD on it, basically the HIPAA breach rule is one of the 3 rules of HIPAA, and they're being sued for breaking that rule. And so that rule dictates that health orgs must disclose breaches of security by providing notification to affected individuals and sometimes the media in a timely fashion. So they are accused of not doing that because their hack happened and they didn't share it for a considerable amount of time. And a couple months before that, T-Mobile, which is a very large network provider here in America, was hacked for the data of 50 million customers, which again included names, addresses, and social security numbers. So how are people doing this? So brute force is one way. This is kind of like you can run a program, or you can just like try a bunch of passwords. There's a dictionary attack with this too, which you use like the common password. So people use password as their password, or password one, or, like a few. If you look online for most common passwords and you try those for a few, you might be able to get into a single system and then move on to other ones. And so we talked about malware as well, so as one of the smarter hacking ones. They also have websites which will have a fake login. So if you type Google with one too many O's, for example, or if you go to a page that looks exactly like the page you're trying to log into, those are set up by hackers, which look exactly accurate. But when you enter your username and password, instead of giving your credentials to Google, it'll give your credentials to this third party, and then they can log in with your account at a later date. There's also phishing and social engineering. So just like the UCSD example I got into in the beginning, really a social engineering is kind of presenting yourself as an agent or someone who's trying to help or works for the company, and say, hey, give me your password info and I'll help you. And people still fall for this today. But I know 30 years ago, in the infancy of the internet, literally everyone fell for this because if it was the early days of AOL or Earthlink, you get a message from AOL System Messenger. That's why they started adding a caveat of AOL will never ask for your password, because a lot of people were getting tricked by this phishing. And phishing is spelled Phishing in this case. So these are some of those. And getting into some health tech, in addition to UC San Diego Health. So for e-prescribing, we use two-factor authentication. And for signing up, you need to use a KYC, which is like a know your customer. So when you sign up for electronic prescribing, just like signing up for prescribing, so generally in EHR, you need to sign up to do prescriptions directly through your EHR vendor. And this is done by, it's a pretty long process, but usually you can get it done in a few days, but you need to provide a personal credit card. You need to provide your driver's license or an ID. You need to prove who you are. And I'll just go to my last point real quickly. Fraud still persists throughout all of this. So you can imagine if, like a lot of people get their identity stolen, if a doctor gets their identity stolen, that doctor or that thief could then sign up for an EHR as the doctor. And there's a lot of EHRs out there, so you can try a lot of them, a lot of these SaaS-based EHRs that I've mentioned in the past, Practice Fusion, Valent, Dr. Chrono, et cetera. There's a lot of these that you can just try to sign up for. And if you're able to get into those systems, you can e-prescribe as that doctor. So the things you have to share, though, are going to be, like I said, a credit card. And generally, they ask for a personal credit card to prove it's you, not like a company credit card. And once you're in, if you are prescribing controlled substances like opioids or anything that requires a DEA number, then you will also have to do a two-factor authentication each time you prescribe medication. So that's, even though you're logged into the system as the doctor, you're going to get a token that's sent to your phone, or a hard token, and that's going to give you like a 6-digit code that changes every 30 seconds or so, and that will allow you to prove your identity. So, of course, if you signed up fraudulently in the beginning, that fraud still persists, and obviously you will have access to that two-factor authentication as well. So the sign up for EPCS is the electronic prescribing of controlled substances. So that is how that works. And move on to the next one. So I think we'll talk about the prevention of data breaches. So how do we prevent data breaches? So I think one thing is really the build. So we could talk about custom technology builds first, I think. So it's really, there's hashing and there's salting that I want to talk about. So hash isn't that secure, but it is one way of security. So hashing is basically a one-way algorithm used on a string. So if you input that string, you always get the same hash. So a slightly different hash produces, a slightly different string will produce a wildly different hash. So if this is making sense, it's basically like my password is password. I type it in, it'll turn into this long, this long hash of like, a bunch of letters and lowercase, uppercase number, like all kinds of stuff. But if I type in that same password again, it'll always give me the same output. So my input will be my password. My output is this long, like unintelligible string of text. So hashes are really useful because you can give me a password. I will put it through my hashing algorithm and store the hash. So only the hash is stored. So every time someone comes and claims to be you by logging in with your password, I can check by comparing the hash result of the input password to the one I have stored from the first time. So the added benefit is if my information on you is stolen, nobody knows your password. They only know this long string of the hash that your password produces, which sounds good. But the weak point of this is that each input or each string produces a very specific hash. So if your password is password 1, your hash will be the same hash of everyone else who uses password 1. And if somebody gets a hold of my data, they will see a whole bunch of hashes that are the same, and the thief might be able to correctly guess that that is password 1, and then he'll be able to access every account with that same hash. So I'm talking about this prevention of data breaches. This is where salting comes in. So salting is when you type in your password, I add a random string of numbers and letters called a salt before I put it into the hashing algorithm. So every time you try to log in, every user has a different salt, and I add that same salt to your password every time you log in. And this guarantees that no two users will have the same hash, making stolen user tables even more useless to an attacker. So that's one thing. Let me see. Yeah, and then training. I think training is another important one. So you really want to make sure that everyone on your system knows kind of the requirements, and not to get caught phishing, although it happens no matter what, I guess. So I've had to do a lot of these kind of, I mean, I'll call them useless online trainings as requirement for being a consultant at a lot of these companies. They make you like onboard and do this training. And it is more of a checkbox for the company rather than actually preventing theft or cybersecurity. They're able to say, once kind of a breach happened or something, they're able to go back and say that, oh, we had 100% compliance. This was a freak occurrence or something like that. But yeah, there's a lot of companies that do this kind of pure online training, and will try to prevent things this way. But like I said, the social engineering is going to be ever evolving, and you can't really stay ahead of it. So you just gotta always make sure that the people who have access really require access, and to kind of guard that very well. I think the other thing is, as we say that INX is a technology partner, you really need to choose your partners wisely as well. If you look at even the big name companies, there's been a lot of hacks. Like I said, there was the Amazon one for Twitch. T-Mobile's a huge name, and they got hacked. So it's really to understand what kind of security measures are going to be put in place by these companies, and to have someone on your team as well that understands this. I don't think you need to go as far as getting a cybersecurity expert. I think those guys are more selling their services. But it's just partnering with companies that really know what needs to be done, and they can explain to you even more in depth than I explained today what exactly they're doing to keep your information safe, what the security is. And if you're getting into Web3, that's even more important, because even though every Web3 dev company talks about how secure the blockchain is, even this last week, there was a huge breach and a lot of things stolen in the blockchain realm as well. So NFTs and Bitcoin and things like that, the security is just as secure as the weakest link again. Logging into your account, losing your phone, all kinds of things like that can lead to kind of a disaster. And then when we talk about ensuring compliance for privacy, governance, and regulations, there's even fines. So Equifax was fined $575 million for their breach, when I believe someone actually had their admin password stored on a Post-it on their screen, because they kept forgetting their password, I guess. So a picture of that went around, and someone was able to get in and steal the credit info of tens of millions, maybe 100 million Americans. And Equifax ended up having to pay 575 million to 700 million in fines, but nothing really happened beyond that. All of our info is still out there, unfortunately. So yeah, I think that's another big one. And yeah, so INX will be also using the latest secure standards. You need to definitely question us about that if you're partnering. And we could also help in refining the clinical workflows to make sure that we have security at the right places, not just for, not just for a convenience or just saying that, hey, we have 2FA and KYC, we're able to do these. Hynix has done this in the banking sector as well as in the stock market. So the anti-fraud stuff, there's also a anti-money laundering, AML, a piece of software that they use as well. So, and the last thing is logging and monitoring. I do want to say that implementing features that monitor logins, high volume transactions, failed login attempts, and user request frequency is also huge. So if you see someone with 10,000 login attempts, you want to either block them after a few. Some websites will only give you a certain number of attempts before it locks your account. So that is suspicious activity. And once you start monitoring this activity, you should make sure that there's an alert threshold for any suspicious activity. And this data should be logged separately from the local server. And kind of like I talked about the Amazon hacker at Twitch, you should also perform testing. They have a penetration testing scan and make sure that it triggers this alert. And for security requirements and test cases, when it comes to the security of software, developers should be familiar with a few of these tenets. So really the main ones are protection from disclosure, protection from alteration, who is making the request, what privileges and rights should be given to the requester, and managing the configuration exceptions and sessions correctly. So all of these things we can go into in depth if there's any additional questions in the future, but here's our contact info. You can contact me personally via email, LinkedIn, or Telegram. And if you want to learn more info on Ionics, especially looking at fintech or Web3 as well, we do Web3 applications across every industry, and of course, health tech and fintech. So yeah, I'll come in to see if there's any. All right. We have a couple of questions. How can we secure patient information while also making it easily accessible? Yeah, so I mean, I think it goes to the point I made right at the end with really who should be making this request, and what privileges and rights should be given to the requester. So if you look at software like EHRs, you want to make sure that when someone's inside the system, they can see the health data if they need to see it. So there's different user roles and user types you want to create. So you don't want everyone to have access to all of the health data. Your front office staff should only have access to maybe your patient list and scheduling. They don't need to be able to open the clinical note necessarily, or to look at other patients' info. There's also some of where within a single practice, the providers will not be able to look at each other's notes. This is more common in like mental health practices or psychiatry, where you might want additional safeguards within your practice. Yeah, making easily accessible is one thing, but of course, you don't want to implement roadblocks for no reason. So there are requirements that we understand for e-prescribing and things like that. You must have, two-factor authentication for EPCS, like I mentioned. So how you implement that, how often you have to do it. If I'm doing multiple controlled substances at once, do I have to do it more than once? Or can I do it once and prescribe 3 different ones for the same patient? All of those can be answered as you go on your build. So we could definitely help with that. Is there a way to proactively stay on top of healthcare security breaches and mitigate them? Yeah, like we talked about a couple times ago on HIPAA, you do want to learn, basically you have HIPAA has the 3 tenets, right? So if there is a breach, like I said, you have to report it in a timely manner. So it's that if you do have a breach, you need to work with your team. You need to work with the authorities as well to kind of figure out how much data was affected. Of course, just like in the UC San Diego Health example, there's a lawsuit involved. So there's a lot of legal implications as well. And the way to proactively stay on top of them is just Like I said, you're only as strong as your weakest link. They have some things like they do testing, like they'll send out an email with a phishing link that's internal, right? So it won't actually steal their password, but you just test to see how many of your employees are clicking on malicious links. The email will have kind of red flags, but as someone who works up on their email on their phone, on multiple different computers, sometimes you get an email and you're really busy and you'll just look at it and you might click the link. It only takes one time clicking. So just being on top of that, making sure people aren't clicking, doing those kind of lame online trainings that I mentioned. It's not the worst thing, but nothing's going to make it 100%. But definitely stay on top of those breaches, and you need to mitigate them in a way that your team's working, as well as working with the authorities. Ways to prevent breach of confidentiality in healthcare, especially with the rising remote systems. Great question. Yeah. So the rise in remote systems, there's been, a lot of talk about adding telehealth services directly into your EHR. Epic has an integration. A lot of things are even just kind of iframing in, different video software into your EHR. I find that most doctors don't really like that. They'd rather just use whatever system they're used to using. During, the midst of the pandemic, I think a lot of people just wanted to use Zoom. It was easy and people are using it anyways in their personal lives. So when you have to log into your health system and have the patient log into a new system and you have to troubleshoot, it's pretty difficult. So I think a lot of people were just using Zoom, and confidentiality in Zoom was questionable at the beginning. I think people kind of got over it, but I don't know if it was ever resolved. But yeah, so confidentiality, as far as, high tech and HIPAA compliance, we need to look at. So you don't really need to worry too much about the confidentiality while you're on a remote call. It's just kind of like a video call. You're not exposing patient data. The most you're exposing is usually your face while you're typing and talking. And the patient will be, either wearing headphones, hopefully, or be in a place where others aren't going to overhear their data. But again, this isn't something that needs to really be worried about as far as remote systems when you're on a telehealth call. Remote systems otherwise, I'll also assume that you're asking about kind of third-party health things. Like you could look at your Fitbit. Now I believe Fitbit added a stroke monitoring or heart attack monitoring thing in the last week, which you can opt into with your Fitbit, which I feel like is probably not going to make a clinical impact. But regardless, more things are tracking your health data. If they get hacked, your data can get hacked. But again, I don't think those third-party systems have the health data in the way that traditional clinical systems have your health data, like I said, with your address and your social security number and all those things. So I think really keeping those things private is the ultimate goal. And yeah, confidentiality isn't going to be like, like you're not sharing, and I think all of the telehealth things or appointments will have kind of a legal caveat of, make sure you're in a quiet place where you have privacy and things like that, so that you're able to avoid any repercussions on the confidentiality. All right, it's 8:30, so we'll end our call this week here. Next week, we will be doing AI in healthcare, which myself, as a fan of AI, and even Lex Friedman and a lot of other AI researchers, getting into what's happening in AI in healthcare is also going to be an exciting topic. So join us again next week. All right, thanks.